right. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Wow, what an enthusiastic, arriving early, devoted crowd we have tonight for our amazing event. It is a real testimony to the quality, depth, and breadth of tonight's speaker that you have. Not only are all here, packed house, but also literally, I've never seen this many people here this early and this ready to go and fired up like you guys are tonight. By the way, for any of you who have not met me, I'm Richard Garriott. I'm the current president of the Explorers Club. And I usually walk around with a mic, but I notice it's double mic'd here, so I'm kind of tethered to the podium here. First of all, I know there's a number of people I've met tonight. This is their first time in the club, so confess and raise your hands if this is the first time. So that's actually about 10% of you are in here for the first time. First of all, welcome if you've not been here before. For all of you who have been here, and especially for those of you who are members who get to come here all the time, this really is like Hogwarts for kids, or Hogwarts for adults, and secret doors all over the place, treasures with amazing backgrounds all over the place. But I do have to tell you one little story. Actually, a couple little stories. First of all, the club's been around since 1904, and in that last 120 some odd years, I would argue basically any explorer worth their salt has been a member of this club. You probably saw down in the entryway what we call our famous firsts, where our members were the first to the North Pole, South Pole, top of Everest, bottom of the deepest point in the ocean, the Mariana Trench, and onto the surface of the moon. You might not know something, which is we send out Explorers Club flags, like you see some behind the screen here. And after some flags, flags are usually numbered, like this one is flag number 98. And after flags have been out on enough expeditions that we think of it as risky for them to go out on future expeditions, we often retire them, and that's why they hang here on the walls. And a lot of them are actually being refurbished, which is why there's usually about twice as many on the walls. This flag, number 98, Richard Byrd took to Antarctica in 1939, and then it disappeared. And we have downstairs what we call the plaque of lost and missing flags, for flags that have gone AWOL. And this flag actually showed up at auction recently. And so we called the auction house and said, you will sell that flag to us, since it's our property, or you will be served with a lawsuit. And they sold us the flag. And so, anyway, it's very exciting to get the first time in, almost 100 years since we have seen this flag, and it literally arrived in the mail like an hour and a half ago. So this is literally freshly back. But tonight it is really an honor, and I know you all know this, to welcome the one. Welcome. Actually, I'm going to introduce the introducer for the one and only George Schaller. George is one of our honorary directors of the Explorers Club. He is the recipient of the Explorers Club Medal, our highest honor from back in 1990. And of course, he's done a lot more since then as well. And you're going to hear, I'm sure, a lot about the past, present, and future of his machinations. So we're thrilled to be hosting you here at the club today, and grateful that you've chosen the club for your first public lecture since the pandemic. So thank you so much for honoring us with that opportunity. And to introduce George, I'd like to welcome the executive producer for the Wildlife Conservation Society and a member of our very own Public Lectures Committee, Natalie Cash, without whom tonight would not have been possible. Please welcome Natalie.
Thank you. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you, Richard, and welcome everybody, both here in the Clark Room and those of you joining us online at home. Richard said, I'm Natalie Cash. I'm the executive video producer at the Wildlife Conservation Society. I'm also a fellow here at the Explorers Club and serve on both its conservation and its public programs committee. The Wildlife Conservation and the Explorers Club actually have a long and storied history that they share. WCS was founded as the New York Zoological Society in 1895, and like Richard says, the Explorers Club in 1904. Both organizations operate in 50 countries around the world. Explorers Club members, there's about 3,600 engaged in science, exploration, and resource conservation for the benefit of humanity, while WCS has 4,000 staff worldwide working to save wildlife and wild places, more field staff than any other conservation organization in the world. And as Richard showed with the flags, throughout the decades, we have shared many wonderful members and expeditions. And so whether it's your first time here or your 500th, you have picked a remarkable evening to hear from a remarkable man. George Schaller is, as Richard said, a senior conservationist with the Wildlife Conservation Society, a career that first began in 1956 with an expedition across Arctic Alaska. He's an honorary director and Explorers Club medalist, the club's highest honor, and first began roaming the world in the 1950s, conducting landmark studies that have deepened our understanding of a multitude of species. Now, as Richard also pointed out, the Explorers Club members are known for their famous firsts, and George has many. He conducted the very first long-term field studies of mountain gorillas, lions, pandas. He was the first person to photograph a snow leopard, and he's been instrumental in the creation of national parks and protected areas for the preservation of these and many other species. He even has a gecko named after him in India that was named to science 2 years ago. So there's a lot of firsts. He's more aptly described as a feral biologist than a field biologist, because up until the pandemic began, he was still spending 9 months of every year in the field. So he first actually became known to many of us, not from the work, but from his remarkable words and his remarkable books, where you intimately chronicle the lives of these amazing animals you've studied and passionately advocate for their conservation. Moving, clear-eyed, powerful science communication is something that is still desperately needed. Today, probably more now than ever, as we confront both a changing climate and those who would deny it is happening. So George's voice is still very vital and important for all of us, and I know I speak for both organizations when I say he represents the very best of us. So I'm a video producer. I'm just a science communicator, do films about the scientists, so I'm going to bring you up first with a short video. So Alex, if we can play that.
I think one of the great wildlife experiences one can have is to look into a wild gorilla's eyes.
What we both love most is being in the field. It's absolutely thrilling to be alone in the wilderness, as if you're alone in the world.
There's the beauty of these animals. They're the finest product of creation, of evolution that the world has ever seen. If you believe in something that is beautiful, that is worth preserving for future generations, you have to keep fighting. thank you so much, Natalie. Incidentally, Natalie also helped tremendously with the arrangement of the photos I will show you. It's lovely to be back at the Explorers Club, which unfortunately I have not visited for a while. I was not doing any travels anywhere for over 3 years. So on this occasion, I decided to do a little exploration of New York. And I'm glad to be here after all this time to meet old friends. Like, there's John Robinson from the Wildlife Conservation Society, New York Zoological Society. All right. That has been my home organization since 1966, and full support not only of me, but now, as mentioned, a huge staff. It's scattered in over 50 countries around the world, all working for conservation, and most of them are locals from their own country. Now, I'm deeply honored to have received the Explorers Medal in 1990. But the one thing I've always realized is the award was really a joint award to my wife Kay and myself. Kay has been indispensable to me for 70 years. So all the research I did, all the travels in the country, she's been kind and helpful and loving and fully supportive. Without her presence and help, I would not be here tonight to begin with. And in addition, she raised our 2 boys, homeschooling them in countries like Tanzania. And she did so well, they're both now university professors. Anyway, so my debt to her is tremendous. And in addition to everything else, she had a tremendous amount of compassion for people and for animals. So wherever we worked, she made a tremendous impact in helping us do the work. So let us start with the pictures. Start with the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Now, that is one of America's greatest wilderness areas in far northern Alaska. I first went up there in 1952. There's a river called the Colville River that goes from the Brooks Range across the northern part of the country into the Arctic Ocean. And a friend and I took a canoe down that river. And at times I went back. It's a great place for grizzly bears. And for caribou. It's got one of the largest caribou migrations in the world. There are currently about 200,000 caribou. And as a recent issue of the National Geographic explained, that population is increasing, whereas other ones in the north are decreasing. And we went to do general surveys. This is a Pedicularis plant. We collected flowers. I found that there are 3 species of mosquitoes that like to bite me. But like any protected areas, it is never, ever safe. And this area, as a result of the Muri work, was established as the Arctic National Wildlife Range in 1960. It was enlarged in 1980. But oil was discovered there. In fact, there was oil known to be there when I was there first. And as a result of politics and greed, it was not protected at all. And so a place called Budu Bay has 800 square miles of development. And here are some of the pipelines. The last time I went back was in 2009, and we flew over a lot of the area just to see what it was like. But it's very discouraging when a country as rich and knowledgeable as the United States cannot protect its last great wilderness. Oil development, there's a caribou wandering through. Arctic foxes, a lot of animals adapt to development. But the caribou, for example, want peace and quiet when they calve, so they're not going to calve in the oil development, even though it used to be their traditional area. The Gwich'in Indians up there have hunting rights in the reserve, and so they go and hunt for meat and skins, what have you. And back in 2009, we took some rafts down a river to see what the changes were in some of the areas. Then in 1956, Olaus Murray, who was president of the Wilderness Society, wanted a survey in the Brooks Range. So we set up, I asked if I could come, and he was happy to take me. And we set up camp in the Brooks Range, and there's our camp at a place called Last Lake. Here, the map of the current federal leased areas, and you can see much of the Arctic refuge, so-called wilderness area, is all leased to oil development. And very luckily, President Biden said the releases are not being renewed. So he's making a genuine effort to try to protect your wilderness. Here's our 1956 expedition. On the right are Olaus and Marty Murray, who were tremendous conservationists and wonderful people. He constantly talked about we must protect our precious intangible values, which means protect the beauty of an area. And he was ill at the time. In the middle is the doctor he took. Then there's myself in 1956. And on the far left is Dr. Bryna Kessel, a biologist at the University of Alaska, where I did my undergraduate work. But one thing I did, whenever I go in an area, I set up little study plots where I took note of the vegetation and other information. And I set up a study plot up there at Last Lake in 1956. Now, 50 years later, in 2006, went back to the area to check on the study plots. And took a student with us, and here we're comparing photographs, not only of the vegetation, but how much have the glaciers retreated from the mountains around there. and which of the spruce trees have died, and how much have they grown in diameter and height, and so forth. So the fight for the Arctic refuge goes on. It will never end. Mountain gorillas. Now, take a look at that face. In the area where I was studying them in the Virunga volcanoes, there were 169 gorillas. I knew each one by name by just looking at their face, which are as distinctive as I could learn all your faces if I give me a bit of time. There he's eating some wild celery. It's a beautiful area, the 8 Virunga volcanoes, which unfortunately are on the border between Congo, Rwanda, and Uganda. So it's a politically sensitive area. The Congo has been in uprising since 1960. See, Virunga volcanoes are down in here, and this is lowland gorillas, not mountain gorillas in that area. Now, what was lovely with the gorillas, I used to go usually alone, sit near them without disturbing them, other than the male would get excited. He'll go, oh, 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 and beat his chest. And but once they see you day after day, they're very intelligent animals. Pretty soon, they simply look up and says, there he is again, and continue with their resting or feeding. And that was wonderful because I could really learn what gorillas do within their group. And the groups were everywhere from 5 to about 25 animals. My wife, Kay, she had her own animal friends there. Those are white-necked ravens who came to feed from food that she was giving them. We had a beautiful home up in the mountains. This is the view from our hut up there. Snow and Mount Karasimbi. Nice gorilla forest all around, little meadow in the foreground. So each day I would wander off in the forest looking for gorillas that I knew so I could plot their ranges. And the gorillas, of course, were watching me. The vegetation, a lot of the area, ground vegetation is 6 feet high. So the easiest way to watch the gorillas was to go climb into a tree and look down, then you could see the animals better. And here's Kay sitting in a gorilla nest watching the gorillas, which are over here. And you have other wildlife. These are little hyraxes, which are in large numbers and do a lot of screaming. One issue has been pressure on the government to give the local people land. It's a very dense human population growing fast. So Rwanda cut out a big chunk of the Virunga volcanoes to give over to tea plantations. And that's one of them. And of course, the local people then go into the forest to hunt and to cut firewood and so forth. So it's a continual battle to keep an area beautiful. Well, in 1960, with independence in the Congo, the some of the local people didn't like an American around, and they started chasing me with spears. And I thought it's time to retire. But luckily, soon, Amy Vedder and her husband, Bill Weber, came and continued the area where it was quieter in the Virunga volcanoes. And they also were excellent at training park guards who soon knew all the gorillas by name as well. And the gorillas came down beautifully. Here's a baby one coming up to a park guard and just investigating. And I remember the day I was sitting on a low branch of a tree, and a female gorilla with a baby climbed up the tree and sat on a branch next to me. And one wanted to give her a hug, but I decided it's safer not to. It's wonderful to be recognized by a wild animal as not being particularly dangerous. And Brenda trained up some very good park guards that went after poachers for deer, and some of them poached gorillas because the fat from the hands has medicinal value, they say. And here's a big, beautiful silverback male. And currently, they estimate there may be 2,000 mountain gorillas left. And there is both Rwanda and other countries concerned, and biologists, there's hope for the future. A magnificent animal. Oh, then Johns Hopkins University started a program in India, and they said, do I want to be part of the program? So I said, sure. So I went over there and disappeared in the forest to study tigers. Now, tigers, gorillas are very similar in many ways to humans. It makes you nervous if somebody stares at you. The same with tigers and gorillas. So you have to be careful not to stare at them. If you want to keep them in sight, you put your head from side to side, but not sit and just stare. Well, the tiger comes and stares at me. But in the center of India, there was this Kanha Park, which has a beautiful big meadow where the deer concentrate, and then, of course, the tigers and leopards come to hunt deer. Here was the park warden, who was very helpful to me. These are Baiga tribal people that have a village nearby, and they hunt in the park. And if I wanted to go look for tigers, I sometimes used the local elephant, and because the tiger would allow quite close approach to an elephant. But here's my wife, Kay, and our two very small sons who lived with me there. Any other species in the area are the gaur, which is a kind of wild cattle. Oops, sorry, axis deer. Let's get by now. Swamp deer. And the tigers again got used to me. And they saw me walking by every day, no problem. So if we came face to face on the road, they'd step aside and lie down, and I amble past without looking at them, and no problem. The tigers, of course, eat livestock. Here is a tigress killing a domestic buffalo. And naturally, local people don't like it. And they kill tigers because the medicinal value in China of tigers is tremendous. Any tiger part has medicinal value. If you eat tiger heart, it makes you strong. If you grind up tiger whiskers, it's good for your toothache, and on and on. And so it's very hard to protect tigers. India, at the very best, has maybe 2,500 tigers left, scattered over the country. But remember, the United States has over 4,000 tigers sitting in its zoos. And tiger skins is a status symbol to wear. So people like to get a hunk of tiger skin and wear it on their cloak or whatever. So tigers really have to be protected to survive. In the middle there is Ulas Kurant, who is the world's tiger expert. He spent the last decades studying them and writing books about them and so forth. And that's one of the beautiful visions in the world, is to see the tigers. And they're so easy to recognize because the stripe pattern in their face and body is so distinctive. So I knew all the tigers in my area by name, just looking at their stripes. And a tiger at night. Oh, now to the greatest wildlife area in the world. If you haven't seen it, it's worth going to. My family and I was asked by the head of Tanzania Parks to come and study lions. So naturally, I took this opportunity, and we moved there for 3.5 years, and I studied anything I could. Beautiful big lions. I never made friends with the lions because you didn't go. I did a lot of walking, but I couldn't sit by the lions because I never knew which members of the pride were behind me and didn't like people. Wildebeest. One of the aspects I studied was their migration. And there were over 1 million. There was heavy poaching, but there's still several 100,000 traveling around. Zebras, wide open plains. Elephants were heavily poached for ivory. So they declined drastically in the 60s. Red bishop bird. A lot of beautiful birds there in the savannas. Here's our home in the Serengeti. And you can see it's a nice patch of forest. Giraffe would come and eat on the acacia trees. In the morning, coming out to go wander around a bit or drive around, I have to be careful because lions would be sleeping underneath a hut. but spent most of the day watching lions, the dynamics of a pride, taking notes. One lioness brought a little tiny starving cub and dumped it at her kill and abandoned it. So I brought it home and Kay very carefully fed it milk, and later we fed it some meat, and our two boys enjoyed wrestling with it. Here we're going for a walk in the Serengeti. The lion, once it got too big to keep, was sent to the Milwaukee Zoo, where it spent the rest of its life. And there he is as a grown lion. Well, it's interesting. I went to Milwaukee to look at the lion, and I went to the cage, and there was no sign of recognition by the lion of me. I don't know what it was thinking. Oh, the other wildlife there was interesting to study. The wild dogs, which roam around in packs and are very efficient killers. And I always collected information of the age and sex of the animals the predators kill. You have leopards there. One used to come and sleep on our porch. Well, animals that aren't quick enough, they help feed the predators. Male lions often band together and travel in small groups, and here they've attacked a big bull buffalo. Cheetahs were always lovely to observe. Here's a cheetah that had killed a Thompson's gazelle, and of course the lion heard or saw, and he comes and chases off the cheetah and then eats the gazelle. Sensible. Well, they have a lovely social life because members, most females in the pride are related. So it's a family. It's only the males that come and go. Well, very little is known about the jaguar. I couldn't find much information when I decided to go down and see if I could learn anything about that big cat. Luckily, I hear they're re-inhabiting the United States north of Mexico, if the ranchers let them live. And some of these, I went to an area, a swamp, about 4,000 square miles in Brazil. It's called the Pantanal. And very few people in the area. And many of the jaguars had never, I don't think, seen people in the boat. So you could get quite close to them and just observe. Here are the Pantanal swamps. It's great for some wildlife and for mosquitoes. Now, jaguars naturally will kill cattle because the cattle are left loose without herding or anything in the swamps. So the locals say, oh, they're killing our cattle. We must get rid of the jaguars. And take a look at those thin cows. Once I started gathering statistics, jaguars killed maybe 1 or 2% of the cattle in the area. All the rest died of starvation and disease. But ranchers don't want to admit that because then they'd have to work harder on protecting their cattle. There you go. One incentive, of course, is jaguar herds bring a good price on the market, even with American tourists. If you want to call in a jaguar, you get an empty gourd, and you call in and and it sounds like a jaguar calling to make contact, and they'll come up and get shot. The one thing I learned, you know, people think of tigers solitary because they're alone, but jaguars, same, solitary because they're alone. No, they're part of a community. They scent mark trees by rubbing their glands around the anus on it. They scratch trees. They call. When they meet, they already know each other's smell. And so these cats are communities that everybody knows everybody else, or they know a stranger when they come in. So that is one of the things that I found particularly interesting when I started studying these animals in detail. Brazilian government wanted me to radio collar some jaguars, so we learned a little more about it. The man in the red shirt is Peter Crawshaw. He's a Brazilian who was a tremendous help to me. He was a college student who wrote me, said he wants to come and work with wildlife. So I said, come on. And he continued for years, and then died, unfortunately, of cancer. But he did a great job of doing the jaguar study once I left it to do other work. Here, we're leading some dogs on a jaguar trail in order to tree it. And once in a tree, I can tranquilize it easy and we can put a radio on it. Oh, white-lipped peccaries. I like pigs. This was a wonderful animal. It's given to me by a local rancher as a little baby. And it so became attached to Kay and me, it refused to be outside the house. It just would scream and bang the door till we let it into our bed. And there it would sleep quietly and cuddly with us. And lovely animal. Ultimately, I returned it to another peccary group, so it had a wild life. makes me feel nostalgic. Another animal I studied was the caiman, local alligators, which were very common and were heavily hunted for their skins. So here's one just hatching from the nest. Oh, and you know the capybara. They're world's biggest rodent. And we studied their society quite a bit. And there are marsh deer down there. So you see in all these places, there's more than one species. Sure, you pay attention and you get the money for studying something like a tiger or gorilla, but some of these other species are just as interesting and just as important in many ways to maintain as part of the ecological community. One thing humans finally are beginning to realize in places, you just destroy nature, you destroy yourselves. Tamandua anteater. Oh, lots of birds down in the marshes. Egrets. Here are our two sons fishing for piranhas, which are very good to eat. But when you pick them up, you've got to be careful you don't put your finger in their mouth. And one of the nice, peaceful jaguars I see occasionally. Giant pandas. World Wildlife Fund made an agreement with China to study giant pandas, and I was very lucky that they asked me to help with the study, because this was 1980, just after the Cultural Revolution in China, and Americans were not particularly welcome. But I went every year for 40 years to China, and I was treated wonderfully. The pandas were like the gorillas. You go near them day after day, they get used to you. And you can then observe behavior that you wouldn't see otherwise, because if you look at the dense bamboo, they can hear you coming and disappear before you can even see them. So get a picture like that, sit near a panda. This is a female, our local biologist called Zhen, and she became particularly close to humans. But the terrain is not easy. It keeps you in condition. Now, here, historical reports. You can see pandas were quite widespread in China, and this is all there's left, is a few isolated populations. And here's one reason. This is the Wolong Nature Reserve, where we did a lot of our research, but it's full of people that have deforested most of the lower slopes and turned it into agriculture and so forth. So unless you keep the bamboo for the pandas, they have nothing to eat, because that's the main thing they want to eat or can eat. Here's our home in Wolong Reserve. Well, that's fine. We had a stove and a bed, And here Kay is collecting firewood. Other species there are the takin, which sometimes go in herds of up to 50 or more. And so I did a little study on them. And the golden monkey. All these species get used to you if you don't harass them. One of the takin that you saw, he just liked being near our cabin, and he just stayed there. I saw him every day. Many species of rhododendron there. And it shows you, once the pandas sort of accept you, they go on about their business. And this is typical. The female tucks her head way down to her chest. And again, China wanted us to radio collar some pandas to get more detail. And so here are two of our co-workers. And we caught the pandas in part by building big log traps and baiting it with meat, contrary to what people believe pandas only eat bamboo. Well, if they can get a good meal of meat, they're happy to get that. And you can see the meat remains here. Oh, here our team is plotting where we got the radio locations from. I was very lucky. China had started its own panda project, and the leader was a professor named Hu Jin-chu. And suddenly, an American was dumped in their midst, and they were remarkably tolerant and friendly and helpful. So we worked well together. And you can see here, these are 5 pandas and a large range overlap in their travels. It's not a big area they're in, 15 square miles or whatever. Well, like everything else, pandas have some medicinal value. That's virtually everything in China. So this is a poached panda, and unfortunately, panda skins in Japan give a high price. So a lot of pandas were killed and sent to Japan. However, there's one female, Zenjen, who saw us around the cabin, who smelled food inside. So one day she just moved in. And there she's sitting in one end. She was somewhat irascible, and our staff sits at the other end. And I showed you the tent earlier. Well, she decided the bed in case of my tent was a perfect place to sleep. Now, I also mentioned that pandas eat up to 30 pounds of bamboo a day. So if they sleep a few hours on your bed, you can see what they're likely to leave behind. So my job when I got home and opened the door so she would leave was to clean up. And bamboo shoots is their favorite food. It's juicy and fairly nutritious. And in season, there are lots of it. The main problem with bamboo is, here's another kind of bamboo. This one dies, there's a mass death every 40, 45 years. And all the bamboo dies in an area. And the last mass death in that area was in, 1964, 65, and so forth. And over 100 pandas died of starvation. And then the bamboo sprouts from new shoots, from seeds. And here's our team having Christmas dinner with a bottle of wine. It was a very congenial group. I enjoyed working with them. After 5 years, we knew enough about the pandas, and there were enough trained Chinese to carry on the work. So the government asked me to work on the Tibetan Plateau on the wildlife and the wildlife migrations. Now, this is typical view of Tibet, some blue lakes, snow mountains, and in the foreground, you got several hundred Tibetan antelope, or chiru. Oop. What's going on? There. So it's a big area. Here's a Tibetan plateau. It has nothing to do with me. Well, fine. Some of the wildlife, Tibetan hare, wild yaks, impressive animals. They go up in herds of 100 or more, but they're also heavily hunted because they have fine wool. There's a lynx. He wasn't afraid of me. I stood about 10 feet below the rock, and he just sat to look at me. There's a Tibetan wolf with the remains of a Tibetan antelope kill. But you see, this is very close. Most of the animals were not afraid. Tibetan antelope, or chiru. They're sort of a strange mixture between goats and antelopes. And as you can see, the male on the left are very handsome, and female on the right. Now, they've got an unfortunate condition. They have the finest known wool in the world. As a result, during the 1990s, when China didn't pay much attention, about 300,000 Tibetan antelope were killed for their wool. But in spite of all that, I had permission to keep roaming around Tibet and see what was going on. Here, youngsters suckling, females watching. You can see they're not very afraid in some of these remote areas. So to find out about their migrations, we ear tagged some animals and put radios on some. And there's my co-worker, Ali Kang, who is just approaching a sleeping youngster here in the snow. And then we catch it, wearing gloves to leave no smell so the mother will accept it back. And on the left is Ali Kang, and right is Liu Berlin, two very good co-workers who've continued working in that region. And here's finally, after seeing the amount of poaching, China put a guard force into the area with vehicles, and that helped. Here's a typical poacher. Most of the wool is removed from the hides and smuggled to India and Nepal, where it is woven into expensive shawls. That's a different direction than tiger skins, which are smuggled from Nepal and India to Tibet, because Tibetans like to decorate their cloaks with tiger skin. And the horns also have medicinal value. And the meat is used, of course, it's very good. Here he's plucking the wool out of a chiru hide. And there is a beautiful chartreuse shawl. I don't know if you've ever touched them, but they're wonderfully soft and very nice to have around the neck. But you also have to realize that that nice shawl around your neck is equivalent of 5 to 7 that Tibetan antelope. And the local people hunt naturally for various items. Here is a cradle made out of wild ass hide. He has a foxskin cap. The Tibetans were very, very hospitable. If you showed up at their house or tent, they'd invite you in for the night and for a meal and so forth. Here's one of the local herdsmen, name is Pujum Narla. He and his family lived in a tent made out of yak hair. All right. He made good money from selling Tibetan antelope wool. So the next thing is he lived in a nice mud hut with his family, and he had a motorcycle that he could get around in. It's faster than a yak. And here's another gentleman with a motorcycle. The trouble is, on these open plains, the motorcycle can go faster than a Tibetan antelope. So people roar across the plain carrying a club, drive next to a Tibetan antelope and club it to death. Then you don't waste bullets. And other species, here's a lovely herd of wild asses. A lot of these large communal rangelands were divided up by the government into private property. And that changed everything in that area. Because if you have private property, you don't want your neighbor's yaks eating your grass. So what do? You build a fence. So a lot of that area's got fenced, but then what does wildlife do? It needs to get the grass. And you know this little animal? The pika. You have them out west. Well, pikas can be very abundant. Lots and lots of holes in the area. And the locals say they eat all our grass. Well, they also eat the poisonous plants that would kill the livestock. So their government response was poison it, spread poison grain all over the place. Well, it killed a lot of pikas, but it also killed anything that eats grain. So there's a constant battle. And how do you deal with the government? You can't say you're doing something stupid. You can make suggestions and say, look, they're eating poisonous plants. We got to have some, and they're loosening the soil, and they're doing all sorts of good things, and convince them. And to some extent, that works. I mean, I've worked in 32 countries doing conservation and wildlife work. Now, I'm not going to talk about it all tonight. But as a result of some of that work, he had got 15 protected areas set up in 8 countries. And the total protected areas of those 8 is over 200,000 square miles, which is about the size of California. But nothing is ever safe. You got to keep at it to make sure it's maintained, whether it's in the United States or in China or any other country. Luckily, you have some local people. This is a local guy named Tado, and he's very concerned about conservation, and he brings people together to tell them they must protect the wildlife. And you have monasteries. Now, in Qinghai province particularly, and nearly every monastery has a holy mountain designated by them where wildlife is protected. And they send out guards so outsiders don't come in and kill the wildlife. And that's very good. And they're also very hospitable. When traveling, I usually stayed with them. Here, about half a dozen monasteries got together to have a conservation festival. And that is wonderful. And here's the Lama blessing, going around blessing the people. And I was very proud. I was the only foreigner allowed to attend. And it was a very uplifting experience. And then they march across the landscape in the area near the holy mountain and singing and making sure the area is protected. And then they have little pieces of paper with religious sayings. They're called lontar, religious pictures, religious sayings, and you throw it up into the wind to disperse the good information about protecting wildlife. And for example, one sentence says, kindness to living beings is the only true religion. And that is something worth for everybody to remember. Thank you. Thank you.
You can have George answer your questions out front. We're not going to do a formal Q&A, so if people need to leave, but if you would like, he's here to answer your questions. Thanks again for attending this evening.
Takes back nice memories from the